Ralph Towner is a remarkable figure. He started learning piano, I think, when he was around 3. He started improvising. He ended up going to the University of Oregon, trained the conservatoire there, and he studied piano. He didn't start guitar until later. I think he also studied trumpet and French horn and composition with Homer Keller. He took up guitar later, and he actually went to Vienna to study at the Viennese Academy with Carl Scheiss, and he did that twice, I think once in 1963 and I think once in 1967 as well. In his early career, he played at Woodstock with the folk musician Tim Hardin. I assume he's playing keyboard. There's no film of that actual performance, unfortunately, but he did play at Woodstock, which is quite a claim to fame in its own right. He played with the Brazilian songwriter Astrid Gilberto for a short while. And then, perhaps most importantly, earlier on, he played with the Paul Winter Consort. And it was in the Paul Winter Consort that he teamed up with Glenn Moore and Paul McCandless. Glenn Moore, the double bass player, and Paul McCandless played oboe and saxophones as well. And that became the start of his group Oregon. And then he, famously also played on a Weather Report album, which is rather unusual, with Jaco Pastorius and Wayne Shorter. He played on the track on I Sing the Body Electric, which is probably one of my favourite Weather Report albums. And the story has it that they actually, the intro that he did on the track More was actually, they recorded him while he was warming up so that he wouldn't be too inhibited when he was playing. He thought he might be a bit intimidated in the studio. Ralph Towner also signed up for ECM, and that collaboration has lasted decades and decades and produced some wonderful music. As far as I can remember, I think that Ralph Towner played on around 27 of his own albums or collaborations with other musicians, and then round about the same amount of albums with Oregon as well, which is over 50 albums to date, which is pretty fantastic. He's also written music for chamber orchestra, for symphony orchestras. He's written a concerto, simulacrum, a piano concerto, and he's written for film, for ballet, for television, documentaries. So really hugely creative output over many decades. His music accompanied the Apollo 15 astronauts to the moon on a cassette. And so his music was listened to on the surface of the moon. And there are actually 2 moon craters named after 2 of his tunes. The first one is named after his tune Icarus. And the second one is called Ghost, which is named after the track Ghost Beats. Ralph Towner's book is obviously a great source of information about his techniques and his ideas. And so I pick out 4 exercises from his book which I think are particularly relevant to preparing to play a piece like this. So the first one is called polymetrical rhythmic groupings. It's exercise 4 in that chapter on page 12. And he says about this, he says, "This is the first example of an important principle that carries on throughout this book. Your right hand must become independent enough to play melodic rhythmic groupings that are asymmetrical to the time signature and its symmetrical groupings of 4, 3, or 6 16th notes to the beat. I'll call this polymetrical playing, the implication of 2 or more time signatures occurring simultaneously. If you are finding this awkward at first, it is because your attention is placed too strongly on the melodic pattern instead of the 4/4 rhythm of the metronome and the important reiteration or landing of the bass note A at the first downbeat of the measure. The division of attention and the control of it also play an important part in how you perceive and shape the music you are playing. Try stratifying what you're listening to and place the first beat of the fundamental time signature as the most dominant element in your perception. Try not to be seduced into hearing the rhythmic complexities of your right hand as foremost in your attention, or you will often lose your focus." So this exercise is based around this A minor ninth chord here. And to execute this, Raltana suggests that you use right hand planting. So very briefly, what that is that when you begin the arpeggio, you place the thumb and the three fingers down in advance like this. And then as you play through the arpeggio, the fingers are lifted one at a time and then float above the strings until the thumb strikes again when the fingers are replanted. Then they're lifted one at a time again, floating, and then replanted a third time. So the sequence is that: thumb, index, middle, ring, middle, index, plant, thumb, index, middle, ring, middle, index, plant, thumb, index, middle, ring, middle, index, like that. But that sequence of notes has to be organised into 4 beats to the bar in semiquavers. So what we get then is this: 1 E and a, 2 E and a, 3 E and a, 4 E and a. So here the thumb is on 1, on 2 the middle finger accents, on 3 the middle finger accents, and on 4 the thumb accents on the 4th string. So what we should get is that 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. I played a little bit quicker, it sounds like this. So the next exercise he calls his bar and scale exercise, and this is based around a D flat major scale here. But from the 7th C in triplets. Like that. And underneath that there's a low F which is sustained by holding the bar down, and that's played in minims underneath. So that would sound like this. So on like that. After that, he suggests you take us up 1 fret at a time, so the next one would be here like this. So on like that. So the next study is an arpeggio study. This is exercise 1A on page 62, and it's based around this chord: A, E, D, C, B, and A. And it uses the same 3 fingers which are found extensively throughout the Mevlana Etude. So it's the difference is that it's 6 beats to the bar rather than 4, but the same principle is still there. You're using 3 fingers, but you're having to bring out rhythmic semiquavers, 4 semiquavers at a time. So that's done by accenting. So here we go: 1 E and a, 2 E and a, 3 E and a, 4 E and a, 5 E and a, 6 E and a, 1. Like that. So we just play that: 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, like that, and a little bit quicker. So the next exercise is what he calls his melodic broken chord exercise, and this is on page 66. This is very similar to the last one, and that involves the index, middle, and ring, the thumb, index, and middle fingers coming across the strings and back. But this time the difference is that the fingers of the left hand are lifted. So this time we don't get the over-ringing that we did before. But what we do is we get the notes separated so that they form a melodic idea rather than a harmonic one. So it's based around this sort of augmented shape here. And it goes like this. 1 E and a 2 E and a 3 E and a 1 E and a 2 E and a 3 E and a. Okay, so that would go 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. And then he suggests that, like the last exercise, he suggests that you move it up. So that would sound like this. Moving up again. Like that, and so on. Now, while obviously exercises are very useful, very worthwhile to practice, I think that there are limits to practicing just these repetitive exercises. In many ways, I think it can be more useful in the long run to take complete pieces which have been designed as exercises, but nevertheless develop a particular technique. So there are two outstanding examples of this that you use. I mean, you could use the Giuliani, the 120 Giuliani exercises if you've got the time. But I think these are better because these are complete pieces. So the first one, of course, would be Villa-Lobos, his studies. And the one that seems to be most relevant to this piece is his first study, the famous one in E minor, which goes like this. The second one is Leo Brouwer's studies, which are fantastic. I'd recommend to anybody. But particularly relevant in this instance is his study number 6. It's the one that starts like this. The other one would be his Etude number 11, which starts like that. That's very worthwhile because that's actually using the same pattern in the right hand as well. The music of Ralph Towner has had a massive impact on my own musical life and thinking. I first discovered him in a record shop just by Central Station in Liverpool when I found his album Solo Concert. This appealed to me immediately. It's had this sort of Mark Rothko kind of cover, this American abstract like cover on it. And then when I turned to the back of the album, there was this photograph of just Ralph on his own with just a classical guitar and 2 12-string guitars. My own musical influences at the time, I remember, were obviously classical music. I'd started playing double bass when I was a child, in various youth orchestras and bands and things. And so I'd also then been listening to Julian Bream, John Williams and Segovia. But more recently, I developed a very deep interest in jazz. I'd been listening to a lot of Joe Pass, particularly his solo albums, other jazz guitarists, Jim Hall. Also, I've been very, very influenced by folk music as well, folk music from the British Isles. But also, particularly guitar-wise, by the playing of people like Leo Kottke and then to some extent also John Fahey as well. So there are all these influences from different directions. And when I took that album, Solo Concert, home listened to it, I was absolutely thrilled, because I realised that all of these influences could be, as it were, brought together in one voice. And this was very, very important for me fairly early on, in the early 1980s. So that would obviously be one of my Desert Island discs, I think. But if I had to choose two other albums that I like by Ralph Towner, one of them would be Oracle, which is his collaboration with the wonderful bass player Gary Peacock. Gary Peacock is a very, very intuitive player, and in so many ways his playing brings out a lot of the very, very best of Ralph Towner's improvising qualities. The other album that I'd choose, although this is a very difficult choice just to choose three, would be Solstice, Sound and Shadows. Solstice was a fantastic group that Ralph Towner was part of for a while, with Jan Garbarek on saxophone, John Christensen on drums, and Eberhard Weber on bass. And I love this album as well because of the strength of the compositions, Ralph Towner's compositions on it. The playing is just absolutely beautiful, and the atmosphere on the album, I believe the whole album was done in basically one take in Rainbow Studios in Oslo. So apart from Ralph Towner's playing and compositions, Jan Garbarek is as strong and melodic as ever. But I think for me, it's also standing out, John Christensen's drums is beautiful, sensitive playing, and this incredibly articulate, tactful bass playing by Eberhard Weber as well. There are some parallels between this piece and Egberto Gismonti's piece that I did a few weeks ago, Celebrations y Nupcias, in that they both are in the key of E, but it's very, very difficult to define whether that key is major or minor. There's a great deal of chromaticism. There's this use of open strings. But in other ways, this piece is quite different, and I'd like to just sort of detail some of the outstanding features of this piece. So the first thing that we might talk about is this way that Ralph Towner has of combining open strings with intervals to create these very, very interesting chromatic lines. And also the way that he uses triads and chord arpeggios in an interesting way. So, for instance, in the opening bars, we get this. So what's happening here, right? Okay, so we've got a B flat triad. And when it goes down, it finishes on that F there. Now that F is obviously the fifth of the B flat triad. It could also be a flat seventh of a G triad because the next notes are D, B, and G. So there's a D triad, G triad with an F, making a G7, and here is a B flat triad, a C shape. If we think about it as a caged shape. There, so that's two chords, G7, G, and B flat, one straight after the other. And then we get this chromatic run towards the end of that section there, like that. And that is a series of thirds, E to G sharp, which is the roost and third of the tonic chord, with a G natural in there. There you go, the flat third. And then we get G sharp to C, and then that's another third. So E to G sharp, and then the open G is a third followed by a semitone going down. So up a third, down a semitone, and then G sharp to C, like that, or A flat to C. G sharp to C, A flat to C is a third or an augmented second, and then down to the B. So that's another third going down a semitone. And then we get another third now again, C to E flat, a flat third this time, but then going up a semitone to the E, which is the tonic there. So whoops. You get the E there. So there straight away we see two important elements of this piece. This is this use of triads here. And then this combination of open strings and intervals to create this very, very chromatic line that's going on. The next passage after that, we get, after this arpeggio, we move down into this chord here. To here. If you think about it, we've got this melody which is doing this. Then down 2 frets. And then down again. So we've got this slow moving melody on the top, and then the bass sort of follows the melody roughly, but then in between, what was sandwiched in between, we get these very, very rapid sequences of arpeggios. And of course, because we're using the same shape all the way down with the left hand, what that means is that the pattern, the intervallic pattern in those arpeggios remains consistent and gives this real feeling of form to the passage, which wouldn't otherwise be there. So it's not chaotic at all, it's actually very, very structured. The next section's interesting, and that it highlights another, I think, important element in Ralph Towner's musical thinking. This section sounds a lot more settled, a lot calmer than the preceding bit, and that's mainly because we could see it overall as being in the key of E minor. But what Ralph Towner does is he uses a sequence of modes successively to create this harmonic movement in the piece. So it starts off, and we've got bar 15 and 16, we're actually from the E harmonic minor scale with this distinctive D sharp leading note. Going on into bars 17 and 20, we've got the F sharp in the bass with the introduction of a D natural and a C sharp. So this is, with the F sharp in the bass, it's sort of suggesting an F sharp Phrygian mode, or the second step of an E Dorian mode, if you needed to think about that, relating it to E. So the next 2 bars, they contain a tonic E minor add 11th chord. And then the very next bar, which is bar 23, the whole apple cart is overturned. We get an A flat major 7 sharp 9. So this is a very dissonant chord. It's actually built from the flattened 6th step of C harmonic minor scale. We could think about this as an A flat Lydian sharp 2, if we had to. And this contains anharmonically both the third and the flat third. And this immediately undermines the stability of the E minor tonality in the previous section. Bars 25 to 46 feature this constantly shifting sequence of very chromatic sounding bar chords, and I find this passage interesting, worth looking at, because again it includes an element of Ralph Towner's thinking that's found not just in this piece but found throughout his own all of his music. He actually details this in this fantastic book, Improvisation and Performance Techniques for Classical and Acoustic Guitar, which is sadly out of print, but if you can get a hold of a copy of this, he goes into this in quite a lot of detail. In the section on page 70, chords and corresponding scales. So you can see here that he uses a triad against the bass note, and the bass note is quite often very dissonant against the triad at the top. So for instance, in bar 25 we get a G minor, on a B. So that's the G minor triad contains the flat third, obviously, B flat, and then the B, the major third, is placed against the triad. The following chord is a B on an E. There are other intervals added to these chords, but Ralph Tanner talks about that in his book, so it's well worth following up. We've got a B on an E, and then that's followed by a G minor on a B, an E minor on an A flat again. You see, well, like the G minor on the B, the E minor on the A flat, the E minor has got the G as the flattened third, but the A flat and harmonically is the same as the major third, G sharp. So very, very dissonant sounding groups of notes. The next chord is an F minor on an A, and then an A on a D with a fourth in the bass again, which is quite dissonant. And then that passage, you get a D sharp on a B. In bars 33 to 40, you can see that each piece is alternating between a major and a minor triad on the top. It's got the flattened ninth in the middle, and the third is in the bass. So, for example, in the first chord, we've got a first inversion F sharp major or minor triad with the flattened ninth G in the middle of the chord and the A at the bottom. So this shape is maintained as it shifts position in the left hand throughout this passage to create a turbulent chromatic sounding wash of semiquavers. However, and this is the important point, the actual melodic line, apart from the occasional chromatic passing note, is firmly in the key of E minor all the way through. So this ends with this rapid chromatic ascending run that again is combining fretted notes and open strings. So all of these strands can be brought together to highlight a handful of techniques that are found not just in this piece, but in a lot of other music by Ralph Tanner as well. So the first thing is his use of open strings. He uses this primarily in two ways. The first thing is to provide interesting intervallic ideas within chord structures that you could not reach normally with the left hand. So by putting an open string and combining that with fretted notes, you can get all sorts of very, very pianistic sounding chord ideas in there. The other way that he uses open strings is in scalic passages where he runs his hands across strings, particularly in the right hand here, to produce either chromatic or diatonic lines, which are using the intervals in the left hand combined with the open strings and then right hand patterns to bring those to life. We could also talk about the fact that the chromatic structures within the pieces are actually very, very logical, and he achieves this in two ways primarily. The first one is this idea of modal contrast, where he will shift from, for example, Dorian mode for a bar or two, and then shift into a Phrygian mode, E Phrygian, and then shift into another mode a bar later. So this gives this very, very purposeful harmonic contour, it's sometimes described as. The other thing is that he's using these triads, usually major and minor triads, but sometimes diminished in other types, so augmented triads, above bass notes as his primary structure. And then he colours these with other notes that are taken from the mode. But the principal structure of the chord is quite often a triad combined with a bass note, as discussed in his book. He pulls this together by using recognisable symmetrical patterns. Again, primarily articulated with the right hand. And interesting melodic contours, systematic use of intervallic shapes, usually in the middle voice. And this is combined with this slow-moving, quite often slow-moving melodic idea in the upper voice. And finally, we might just point out that this piece, in spite of all its chromaticism, rather like the Egberto Gismonti's piece, Celebration de Nupcias, that I played a few weeks back is very, very tonal, and both pieces, this piece and Egberto Gismonti's piece, are in the key of E. Now this piece presents some quite technical challenges for you to play as well, so I'll just sort of just try and give a little bit of an overview of that. I've talked in my other videos about hitting harmonics and things. This passage here utilises this right hand technique that Ralph Towner uses a lot. It's rather like banjo rolls that you find in traditional American music, and I think Chet Atkins as well use these ideas. You can also find these ideas in Giuliani and things. You know, earlier classical players. The basic principle is that you play a series of chords or intervals with the left hand, but then play a symmetrical pattern with the right hand as you come across. So for instance here, I play thumb, index, middle, and then thumb, index, middle again, but I'm accenting to create groups of semiquavers, 1 E and a 2 E and a 3 here. So 1 E and a 2 E and a 3 E and a 4 E and a like this. So there, even though I'm using a group of 3 fingers, thumb, index and middle, I'm creating semiquaver patterns by moving across the strings like this. So from that angle, so that's got everything to do with how you accent. Whoops. Arriving on that beat there. The next significant problem is in chords like this, and this is pretty horrible, really. He plays this chord here, like this. So this is C sharp, and C sharp at its octave here with a bar here. And this finger here is on E, and then we've got a G and a C natural up at the top there. It's giving us this chord. And then holding that 4th finger down, shifting these 2 fingers across to get this chord. And then we move that whole shape down and get this chord again here. And then keeping the 4th finger down and shifting across again to make that chord. And then shifting down and making the same. Now this is a very, very difficult stretch. So when I come from here, I shift down and make my basic bar here, holding the 4th finger. And what I'm effectively doing is I'm anchoring these 2 fingers and twisting these 2 fingers against these 2 points of anchor here. If you try and play this chord by keeping the hand free and trying to move into the chord, you won't be able to play it. So here I've anchored the 4th finger and this finger, and then with those 2 fingers anchored, then I can twist these 2 fingers into shape against the anchored fingers here like this. And then again, when I come to make the shift, anchoring those 2 points and then making the shift. If that stretch is too difficult to anchor, I think I do this on the 1st string here. What I do is this. I anchor here to get this chord, and then anchor the 1st finger, place those 2 fingers, anchor these 2 fingers and stretch the little finger against that. Fortunately, that passage is rubato, so having to make those changes, I can actually pace myself quite nicely without straining too much to actually find those chords under there. Then we get this again, this passage here. This is, as I mentioned earlier, this is combining open strings with intervals to produce this pattern. Then we get the sequence of chords here. So again, this is quite interesting. So here what's happening is that we've got this arpeggio in the right hand. This is basically an F sharp minor chord here, Phrygian. So here I've got the melody, the slow moving melody up at the top, E, like this. But then we've got this pattern played with the thumb, index and middle fingers in semiquavers underneath, lifting this finger off. And again, this is all about the accenting, because this is a 4-note pattern, but I'm playing it with 3 fingers. So what I'm doing, I'm thinking 1, E and 2, E and. So the accent is on the index finger. So just exaggerate that a little bit so you can see it. 1 E and 2 E and 3 and 4 E and like that. But in the second time it does that. So that's 4 E and then it goes to the next chord. But there you can see the accenting here with the index finger. Get it right? So there you can quite clearly see the index finger accenting that 4th string. Here, the same thing. And then the melody starts to shift a little bit quicker. But underneath you still hear that 1 E and a 2 E and there. We've got another shift here. But there's that consistent symmetrical pattern that's being played with the right hand then at that point. The Mevlana Etude was released by Ralph Turner on his album Blue Sun, and it was also published as part of his suite for solo guitar. Mevlana means in Turkish our master, and it's commonly but not always applied to the great poet and mystic Jalaluddin Rumi, who's associated with the whirling dervishes in Konya. And this piece for me is very, very evocative of some of the beauty and the depth of Rumi's poetry. And I also wonder whether Ralph Turner was influenced by the whirling movements of the dervishes, because if you listen to some of the phrases and the rhythms that are in the piece, it does seem to me at least to evoke spinning. So that's possibly a very subjective personal opinion, but I think that might be the case.